Welcome back, everybody, to this week's episode of We Are TPM with Kyle and John Teixeira again, as always. We are here this week to discuss with you the third piece of our how to pick a great property,
how a great property manager can make you more money.
There you go.
Part 3.
By messing up that statement. No. Part 3, we talk about tenant screening, tenant selection. So.
Yep. Really important, right? Like we've talked about so far some important stuff. We've talked about maintenance and keeping your rent rates at market value. That's pretty important. But probably just as important is this tenant selection topic we're about to talk about today. One of the things I hear all the time, Kyle, there's an old phrase in what we do. It's tenants and toilets, right? It's a phrase to describe the reasons why people don't want a rental property, right? Because they don't want to deal with tenants and toilets. Well, A, get you a property manager, and B, maybe you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, that's a fear-based decision if I've ever heard one, that's for sure. So
I always laugh when I hear people say that. And it's people like to disseminate that. It's a quick, easy, tenants and toilets. Everyone's got, I always tell you, Kyle, you and I talk about it. You always hear the horror stories, right? Nobody tells the good stories about property management or about owning a rental property. Nobody says the boring story. Hey, I've owned this rental property for 15 years and it's made me, $12,600 a year. And now now it's worth 3 times as much as it was when I bought it 22 years ago. In summation, that seems like a nice story, but nobody tells it, right? Everyone tells when the tenant leaves the place trashed and it cost me $6,000 to fix up.
Well, yeah, nobody wants to hear that story because they think it's the one-off case, when in reality it's the majority. And what you just mentioned, the story you always hear is the minority there. So it's...
Well, it's the same reason the news stations choose what they're going to run, right? It's what people want to talk about. It's what people want to tell and what people want to hear.
Or what they want to tell and what they want you to hear. Either one.
There you go. So let's get into the topic, Kyle, because this is really important. Let's start with detailed screening. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, kind of base it on what we do, what you and I do, right, Kyle? Because we feel like we do things a cut above the rest. Definitely a cut above most other people, but even a cut above other property managers, I think. We put a lot more into every aspect of our business, but really this one especially, right?
Yeah, because it's, there's not more or less an industry standard for how the screening process go, and maybe it's not a standard, it's more of a standard expectation, where we have a standard way of doing it for us. It just isn't, it's sometimes surprising or whatever, but it's not in line with how most do it, because our mindset is how most do it isn't looking at all pieces and all factors of the puzzle that you need to look at to screen a tenant for being a good tenant, and are they going to pay their rent? So at the end of the day, those are why they're being screened. Yeah. So I feel like, and this is why how we've gotten our standard of doing it is looking at what items show you those things. So, and that's what we're going to get into.
Yeah, and you just nailed the first thing I wanted to get into, Kyle, is the biggest thing is just collecting the correct information, right? Like get the information that you actually need from a potential applicant. I can't believe how many times, Kyle, have you seen we've taken over a tenant on a property and we find out that we don't even have social security numbers. We don't have driver's licenses. We don't have very much on the tenant at all.
And it varies way too much. I could pick up a bulk of 8 properties that were all managed by the same landlord or the same property manager. And for this property, I have this, and this property, I have this. I have a different lease for this one. It needs a standard. It's not just for your operations, but for your clients, for your tenants, to make sure that when something's needed or you're expected to have it, it's not even a question of checking. It's just like, yeah, we have that because that's part of our process. So...
we're going to get into this, but that all becomes part of your selection process, right? So things like copy of driver's license, social security note card, or actually just the social security number is really all we need. Income documents, just contact information, right? How do we get a hold of you? What does your prior residence look like? Those are the kind of things that we're looking for on an upfront application, that if you can't provide that stuff, maybe that's not the tenant that we want to put in one of our properties.
Yeah, and maybe jumping ahead here a little bit, but what you're describing is a completed application. It's part of our standard, and part of our standard process is we require a completed application to, one, be considered, one, to even be ran. That's just to keep it the same way for everybody, make sure we, process everything the same way and make decisions the same way.
So my coach tells me, Kyle, I don't know if you know this or not, but he tells me about selecting employees or people that we work with on our team, right? You and I kind of go through this all the time about, how do we choose this person or that person? And sometimes creating a system for that person to be able to follow a list of instructions that may seem redundant or don't have anything to do with the job, so to speak, at least it tells you that this person can follow instructions.
Yeah, it's not an unrealistic expectation for us to have. You're applying to lease a property. A leased property has a lease. That lease is a set of instructions that you're signing on to follow while you live in the property. So if the smaller document that gets you there can't be done completely, I'm not even going to say right, but just can't even be followed and done completely, then what sense does it make to get you to step 2?
Yeah, so, that's right.
It's a hard thing to explain sometimes, but I need to get you what you need.
Can you follow instructions, right? And it just kind of goes to showing you who you're dealing with, because you're going to have to deal with this person for the next year, 2 years, 3 years, however long they live there, right?
Correct.
Yep.
Correct.
All right. Well, you're right. We jumped ahead. We jumped over some important stuff. So let's get into our screening a little bit, because our screening process is pretty intense, and it starts with some basics that everyone would recognize or expect, and a credit check, right? We do a credit check, but we personally choose not to focus so much on a FICO score, but more focus on what we see on that credit check, because you can tell if somebody's currently paying bills, if somebody's currently able to pay their bills or not, by looking at somebody's credit report.
Yeah, what you're saying is like a very common question, probably the number one question we get about our application process, because it's not explicitly listed like most property managers' requirements are, is what are your credit score requirements? And we always have answer the same way. We don't have a credit score requirement. I'm not requiring you to have a certain score because credit scores do not tell me what I need to know to decide if you are a tenant who's going to pay their bills or can pay their bills. Those two things, at least in our judgment, do not, it's not a loan. Which is what credit scores are mainly used for. You're considering something completely different. So it's looking at the data points of the credit report, the delinquency history, how recent it is, how many it is, the neglect to allow things to pile up or not pile up. And if it's a temporary problem 6 months ago, that's no longer a problem now. All of those things can be seen. And we want to make sure that we consider the situation of the person that's applying, not a situation that happened 3 years ago, 3 rentals ago, unless there's balances. But
how they respect collections to landlords.
Yeah. I don't want to be
on there.
We don't want to be the fourth landlord in line.
Right.
It's not a smart position to put you in. Try to go get a home equity loan that's the fourth lien holder. It doesn't happen. There's a reason it doesn't happen. So
yeah, you nailed it. And so like the most important things we're looking at on those things is, are your current delinquencies, right? Is kind of what you were saying was things that are delinquent like in the recent past, but we're also looking at past sins. I love it on a credit report when I can see past sins and I can see an event and then I see recovery, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm okay with that. That might trash your FICO score, but I can see that there was an event that happened, 9 months ago. And since then we've had recovery and great credit behavior, right? And just to your point, using some common sense when we're looking at this report and making sure that we weed out the things that pertain to us as property managers.
Yeah.
How is this person respecting the tenant landlord relationship when it comes to paying their bills?
Yeah, and there's multiple, tying it back to a credit score there's multiple reasons why you can't make that decision based on just a score. I've seen, and this is very common, probably more common than people think. There's a lot of people who don't use their credit, that don't tap into a credit line and build credit and all that. Well, what does happen even to that common person is they'll get medical collections, medical bills, medical collections are very common. It's something we essentially don't even consider. So if that's the only thing on your credit report, then it's going to bring your non-score down to a low score and probably disqualify you from most applications. Well, if that score is low because you have 2 medical collections and nothing else, then you can't, using a score to determine if they're going to pay their bills is not an accurate thing to do. So.
I can't wait for the day, Kyle, that we're able to take medical collections off of our credit report and stop using them in consideration of further credit, right? Because that's a separate conversation altogether. But yeah, we can't.
That's definitely a separate conversation. But while we're on the report, this is a more recent thing, last couple of years, but it also shows us rent history. There's bureau for rent, or Experian has a bureau for rent history now. Most landlords use it, and we have rental verification processes. That's its own separate thing. But if you can see active reporting from previous rentals or current rentals, give you a really good picture. That credit report's not only telling you if they're paying their bills, it could tell you definitively they haven't been late in the last 12 months at their current rental and when it started, or, the information you get there varies, but it's another thing we look at and can help solidify things, especially if a low score with medical collection has 24 months of perfect rental history, right?
No.
So, because it doesn't affect your credit score, even though it's on there.
Right. Yep. All right. So the next thing, Kyle, that we would do and look at is criminal checks. And really what we're looking for is just, again, those past sins, right? Mm-hmm. And you and I have always been of the same mindset regarding this. We pretty much, I don't want somebody who's currently got a bunch of criminal history, right? And if it shows that they're a career criminal, so to speak, what they call, right? Somebody that's constantly being arrested and has a criminal history that goes right up to now. I don't want to put that person in one of my houses knowing it's going to be a future problem. And then, but the big one is felonies, because this is kind of like an industry standard, no felonies. And you and I have taken a little bit different approach to no felonies. We kind of tell people no felonies, but what we really mean is that, they need a written explanation, something that we can get approved by our homeowner and put in their file. Because the reality is some of us have felonies from, I don't know, when we were 18, 19 years old, we did something stupid, and now they're 38 years old, still having to live with that mistake.
Yeah, and it's another thing about requirements. We don't require or put in the requirements of any of our properties, no felonies, no whatever convictions we're talking about. It's a case-by-case basis, because it's tied into the entire decision of, is this tenant sustainable in this property and will they pay their bills? Well, asking them to explain a felony is just an expectation that homeowners have that will allow us to still consider you on that property. So it's not the other end of it where we need you to defend yourself. That's never the case. It's, we know people make mistakes. We know there's history that may be right, wrong. It doesn't paint the picture of the person now. And that's not what we're trying to knock you down for. It's just to consider fully the whole picture and get those 2 data points figured out. So
I think we're in both of those things we've talked about FICO score and felonies. We're probably the exception for bigger property managers. I think they have a tendency to be, I don't know if I want to call it lazy, but they just don't put enough thought into it. And they just want to do like a blanket, no felonies, credit score must be 620 type of thing, right?
Yeah, and I mean, we know this, but you got to remember you're running a rental application. So your criminal history only applies to the items that affect the rental or could affect the rental or may cause something to affect the rental.
Right.
Things outside of that realm, while we may need an explanation to get it through an approval process, it's not part of the consideration for if you can be a renter of that property unless the history or what the history shows says it could be a problem at that property or it disqualifies you from complex rules, things like that. But you know, your mistakes or the criminal history is a criminal history for the things they apply to. And rental, everyone needs a place to live. Mm-hmm. So disqualifying people who have any kind of criminal background just on a blanket basis, you know, if everyone did that, you'd be guaranteeing everyone with a criminal history is homeless, right? So it's just not the way to consider someone for a rental.
Kind of comes back to common sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, you can call it that. Or standard processes.
So you touched on this one a little bit, Kyle. Just to move on to the next one, is there's a separate database for eviction screenings. Now, I think this is being kind of merged in with what you talked about into Experian's database. I'm not,
No, that's straight court history, public record.
Okay.
So
they're just going through court. This database is basically just screening all the courthouses across the country and then giving us that information that this person has an eviction here in Tennessee or Wyoming or wherever, so that we can see past our nose what eviction activity has happened.
Yeah, and the one common thing people don't realize about eviction activity is it doesn't just show an eviction. An eviction is a, judgment for eviction and could even be a writ of possession that gets removal for eviction. But a filing of an eviction would show up. Mm-hmm. People can have eviction filings against them that never got kicked out of a home. They need to know that, for one, because most probably don't. But it's also considered it can tie into the decisions, because if you got an eviction filing and then you had a year of perfect rental history after that, it shows me there was a hiccup in your life or whatever, but that's in the past. You showed that for a year. It's not going to be considered. If it happened last month, now we have to call that landlord and make sure that you're not currently under it and it hasn't been reported, all that. So it can throw red flags, but it can also help solidify your situation. So.
And if it's habitual, right? If it's habitual and you can see that this is something that happens periodically, right? That's a huge red flag. That just goes to show that this person is not, again, respecting that relationship and going through the process of, forcing their landlord to go through that eviction process.
Yeah.
So, all right, Kyle, let's see. We've got a Social Security verification that we do. Let's talk about that a little bit. That one is kind of right up your alley because you kind of catch these little things sometimes.
Yeah, that kind of ties into, it ties into the general picture of how to pick a great property manager, and I'll kind of go a little high level on that because it takes not just a great property manager or any property manager, it takes some experience doing things to know what you're looking at and what you're not looking at. And what I mean by that is if you run hundreds of rental applications per year, thousands, you should be able to get pretty good experience if you're trying to know what's fraudulent, what may not be fraudulent, what you know for sure isn't fraudulent, all those type of things. If you only do it a handful of times per year, it's one, way harder to catch, two, way harder to know what to do about it or what to ask, what questions to ask. And a lot of that ties into Social Security verification because there is a lot of fraud in property management and in rental applications. And the Social Security verification verifies that social matches the date of birth and the name. Sounds like a pretty simple process until you look at that identity fraud is a thing. It's something that we've come across. I'm sure most property managers have come across. That verification alone doesn't show you that. The credit report that doesn't show an employer that pays you W-2 for the last 2 years. If that's what you're submitting to us and it's not on your report and you've applied for 3 credit lines in the last year, then that's a huge red flag because those would be on that credit report. And it not being there makes you question the pay stubs. And then if you question the pay stubs and you know you're questioning the pay stubs, you know how to, not that you don't verify those as well, but trust me, people and technology these days is pretty tricky.
Yeah, what I hear though is it's like, it seems simple, verifying social security number, but it's just another piece of the puzzle that helps paint the whole picture for you so that you know you've got a legitimate application and you don't have any fraud happening, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can't never know for sure, but you can get your best experienced confidence that you not only are applying or running an application accurately, but accurate to the person who's going to live in the home.
Yeah.
And that the situation makes sense.
So here's one that comes up from time to time that maybe people might be wondering, Kyle, is ITIN numbers.
ITIN numbers.
ITIN numbers. Some people call them TIN numbers, IT numbers. That is a number for a legal alien, right? That's here to work and they're paying their taxes, if I understand that right. And so it's not a social security number, but it's kind of a tax ID number.
Yeah, it's a tax identification number. To clarify that, it doesn't mean that you're a legal alien. It means you're not a U.S. citizen who is either working here or otherwise, and getting an ITIN number in order to pay taxes and get credit in things and all that. So I do know it doesn't require it to be legal or illegal. Okay. We all know that process takes forever. You can't knock people for not paying taxes. You won't let them until that process happens, right? So I do know it's not any kind of alien. So
yeah, and so but a lot of people that come here to this country and do so illegally, though, don't go through the process of getting an ITIN number, right? So the ones that do, right, at least they're reporting something, they're paying their taxes, we know where they are, they're acting like a citizen, yeah?
Yeah. I mean, it really just covers any non-U.S. citizen that needs a tax identification number, because there's work visas, there's people who are on temporary situations, all that stuff. But if you made money in America, you need an ITIN number in order to pay taxes on that money, unless there's exceptions to that situation, but it is a common question. Do you guys take ITIN numbers? Can you run ITIN numbers? The answer is yes, because at the end of the day, it has a different name for a different reason, but so does an EIN number for employers. So does, it's right. Just like your social. At the end of the day, it's a tax identification number. We're going to run it and check your, ITN numbers can have credit reports. They can have history. They can have all the same things your social has. So, except for U.S. citizenship.
So let's move on to one of the next big things that we're checking. So now we've screened somebody. We've done all of these screenings that we just described. One of the biggest things that we really, and this is probably the first thing that I tell people when they call me and say, hey, what's your guidelines? It's income verification.
Yes.
And so we use, I would call this an industry standard. I think the method that we use is 3 times the amount of rent in gross pay before taxes. I don't know. I think for the most part, it's when I talk to my colleagues, that seems like somewhat of an industry standard.
It's definitely the most standardized piece of rental applications through, at least in our market and most markets around here, if not the whole country, is 3 times the monthly rent and gross monthly income collectively by all the applicants. So
yep, right, but household income.
Yep, household income.
Yep. So let's talk about income verification then and how we do that. So there's several things that we do, but the easiest one, I guess, is we have a W-9 employee. That's somebody who gets a paycheck every week. They pay their taxes and they're able to give us 30 days pay stubs, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and usually that you say the easiest because it's the easiest to verify.
Yep.
It has the most information.
Right.
Shows up on these other verifications the most. And it's the easy math. It's where you get into self-employment and 1099 and other situations where it's not necessarily impossible. It's just you have more steps to the process. It also involves more responsive action by the applicant. Unless you got us everything we asked for in the beginning, there's more questions to ask. There's usually more pieces that we have to verify. So,
and to verify that for 1099 employees and self-employment, basically we use bank statements, right? And then we go through the process that's a little harder. Like you said, we have to go through a process of figuring out what your income really is based on those bank statements and trying to create a history over the past 90 days.
Yeah, bank statements and tax returns. So, and it's not that we're looking at, we're trying to find a gross, just like we would be on a W-2.
Right.
It's the only other way to show it. It's also one reason that when I talk to friends and people who do gig work or 1099 work or they're self-employed, the number one problem it's not a problem, but the number one limitation that you can give yourself if you get paid in cash or you get paid directly is not put that money somewhere it can be tracked. Because if it can't be tracked, it can't be verified, and you can't ever use it as leverage. Whether you're applying for a rental, whether you're applying for a HELOC, a line of credit, or any kind of loan. And most people think that's not a problem until they need it. And, well, you can't get it because instead of putting your cash in the bank and then taking it out if you want to, you just kept it in your pocket. And your pocket is essentially like it didn't happen.
Well, okay, so let's jump back just a tad bit. So one of the pitfalls people get into with even W-9 employees, and well, there's two really that we see most commonly. And nowadays with the advent of, Microsoft Word and QuickBooks, it's so easy to create pay stubs. We find fraudulent pay stubs all the time, don't we? We find people that we see give us pay stubs that we can tell in 2 seconds that they've created.
Yeah, I've got a pretty good eye for it. We all kind of do, but it's not uncommon. And it's, I'd like to say it's uncommon, but it's also not very good most of the time. I'm not going to take too much credit. There are some very good ones, but there's trends. Like if you downloaded this and told me you downloaded it, sent it in a PDF, and I get a scan that's half, computer text and all that. It's not only going to be questioned, it's going to be known. And it can be verified. You call it employee verifications with the increase in technology that allows you to make fraudulent pay stubs. Also has the increase of technology with being able to easily verify these things. So, and you can't just ignore it.
You're exactly right. And you're really good at spotting that. And the other thing that I find, I get this all the time when I'm running applications, and we've all trained ourselves fairly well at looking at dates, right? We want to get the last 30 days of somebody's pay stubs, and inevitably, it happens. This is so common for people to not send this past week, or to skip 1 or 2 in the middle. And then you're questioning why, right? And it's almost always there's a reason why. It's because, they don't have that job anymore, or, their hours got reduced, and they're trying to avoid showing you that by giving you, last month's statements or pay stubs. So that's a common trap that I think landlords could fall into.
It is, and it's a common trap that tenants fall into, thinking they need to spruce up their application. We've gone through this process with tenants that their real situation would have been acceptable, and they didn't get a rental because they submitted I don't even need to call it fraudulent, but intentionally misleading application or pieces of it in order to try to spruce up or make it better. And it's just not the way to do it. Either you qualify or you don't at the end of the day.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about fraud, right? And it's pretty prevalent, like you mentioned. And that's the biggest thing with income verification that we're trying to protect ourselves from and our clients from. Anybody who's willing to commit fraud in an application, when they haven't even been chosen yet, tells you a lot about their character and who you're going to be dealing with, right?
Yeah, I mean, it tells you a lot about what they'd be willing to do. I mean, what they'd be willing to do to the property or work orders, or, be misleading about other things. You don't want to be misleading about how a hole ended up in the wall or how the house caught on fire, the worst case things. If you can't get a clear answer on just basic questions, then you probably won't get a clear answer on basic questions later. And honesty goes a long way, especially in this business.
So the bottom line on this is we're just looking for affordability, right? That's really, we want to make sure whoever we put in one of our homes or one of our clients' homes can afford to be there, right? That they show some kind of stability, and we're not going to be chasing them down for money. That's why people hire us.
It is the why, but it's also mitigation too. It's a huge part, because a lot of landlords have told me, why does it matter if I get my rent? Why do these verification things matter if you get your rent? The why does it matter always comes down in pretty much all aspects of life is, well, what's the worst case scenario? Well, the worst case scenario is you get enough rent to move in and they don't pay another dime for as long as you'll let them be there without paying another dime, file an eviction, they never show up to court, go through the eviction process, and then find out after losing all that money that you had filed against a fraudulent identification. So you can't take the real person. You didn't affect the actual person that lived there, and all over some verification processes that could have been done at the beginning.
Yeah,
protecting your investment.
Yeah, you're right. And the worst thing that I see landlords do is I hear stories about how they took money from somebody, right? Tenant came to them with cash ready to go, and they just took it and didn't do all this due diligence that we're talking about today. And then they're dealing with exactly what you just described, right? They're dealing with the repercussions of it. They may have been fined for even a year, but the fact that this person had to come to you with cash and almost to get you to make a quick decision already tells you a lot about who you're choosing to put in your home.
Yeah, I mean, you can't make judgments based on that. It's based on, they qualify after doing that, but it still does give you some accuracy to what information you might get. And gut feelings are not due diligence. Gut feelings do not do math very well.
They're usually wrong, too.
Yeah, I mean, whether they're wrong or they're right, they're not right or wrong for the right reasons.
That's right.
So
you're right.
And they're not protecting your investment.
That's a good one. We need to write that one down, huh?
Gut feelings don't...
I see you already forgot it. I love it.
That's why I should have wrote it down.
Well, fortunately we have that on this podcast, so we've got it recorded. We'll get back to that. So, Kyle, just some other factors. Those are the three main things that we're looking at, right? Those are kind of like our first three steps. And all of those steps, we've had pretty good discussion now about every single piece of those to show how critical each one is and helping make that selection so that a landlord is not paying for it down the road by way of lost rent, vacancy, or turnover costs from having to do repairs. I mean, that's really what we're trying to avoid here by choosing the right person.
Yeah, and collections costs at the end of it. In the worst case, I mean, judgments from a judge don't get money in your pocket. So generally it takes a collection agency that's getting a big cut of it, and you never actually get that judgment amount. But regardless of that, you're never shooting for an eviction. You're never shooting for a collection. You're never shooting for past debt. What you're shooting for is rent to be collected and the property to be returned at some point in the future in comparable condition, minus normal wear and tear. So you should select people that can do that.
Yeah. No, but I feel like we skipped over rental verification a little bit, though, Kyle. I mean, that's really important too for the reasons you just said, and like the old saying that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, and that's really what rental verification is about. Mm-hmm. Is let's find out what this person's past experience is leasing homes. From the past landlord. Would they put this person back in one of their homes, right?
Yeah, and it's a it's a huge thing. Rental verifications are a big piece of that consideration because you're asking somebody who already made the consideration you've made, hopefully in a similar way, and already had the experience of whether it was right or wrong, based on their property. I mean, it's not 100% accurate. It doesn't 100% correlate, but it does give you information from a person that was at one point in your position and saw it through. So,
and you can expect the same outcome is really kind of what I was getting at, right? So like whatever the outcome was there, you should expect the same outcome if you choose that person again.
Yeah, no, not all landlords are perfect. I mean, sometimes there's situations where the tenant says, okay, well, this is what my landlord's going to tell you, and this is why it happened, this is what happened. Landlord backs that up, and some of that may not have been all on the tenant. But the point is, tenant gave us the situation before we asked the landlord.
Yep, exactly.
That perspective, that completed application part of it is huge.
Yep.
Because if I go into a conversation with another landlord knowing your side of the story, and I get their side of the story, I'm not going to make, we're not causing or middlemaning this thing at all. We're just hearing both sides and taking that into the application. So,
yeah, it's all part of the consideration process, right? And if we have a tough situation in the past, but we've got somebody else with the same, everything else is the same that doesn't have this tough situation, that's all going to be part of the selection process.
Yeah, and this may be helping or not helping, I don't know, but it's another piece of misinformation that is very common, and most people don't know that it's not just publicly available. All these things aren't publicly available. Well, who owns a home is publicly available. So when I get someone from New York and or whatever, like you have a New York number, the landlord has a New York number, I'm getting a rental verification from a Tennessee landlord, and the name doesn't match, all that. And generally what we do, if I'm being honest, is we find out who owns the home, we call them if they stated it was a landlord.
Right.
We do need the information from you,
right.
But if I call that landlord, they're like, who is this
we
person?
Usually figure it out when the mother-in-law is put on the application as the landlord, right? So, yeah, it's pretty easy to see through that. Let's talk about some other factors real quick.
When the emergency contact matches the landlord, that's a little bit of a concern.
Some other factors, Kyle. How about pets? Pets play into it a little bit, right? We love pets. We take pets in most of our properties as long as, logistically it works for that particular property. But it still has an impact on who we choose because there are some pets that will damage a property.
Yes and no. It doesn't have an impact on the decision. Either that property, before even taking applicants, is decided whether pets are allowed, and sometimes those properties come with pet restrictions of can't have this breed or anything like that. But whether they have a dog or don't have a dog is not taken into the consideration. It's if you have a dog, does it qualify under the restrictions? So.
Well, we take all that. Maybe this requires a little bit more explanation because we take that a lot further, don't we, Kyle? We actually go through this screening process for pets, and so we know exactly whether they've been they've had all their shots and where they are, how old they are, how big they are. I mean, there's a screening process that we go through.
Yeah, and that's more for safety and liability of pets.
Right.
We have to verify some things about your pets to make sure that they can live in the home, whether they're in a complex or even in a subdivision neighborhood. There's still liabilities for the landlord and requirements that vaccines and stuff like that. So yeah, we screen them and make sure that those have been, what is required has been done.
All right, so we'll put that in the more due diligence bucket. Mm-hmm. How's that, Kyle? How about move-in date?
Yeah, move-in date matters, and it's part of, this is one of our requirements, if you want to call it, but this can vary by market, I guess, but hasn't really. It needs to be in the near future if you're applying for an open property. That's because we are accepting rental applications for a rental, generally on behalf of our client, and it's our job to make sure we maximize or minimize turnover time. So we can't consider applications in 3 months, in 2 months, especially when it's a market and there's other people wanting to move in 2 days, 2 weeks, on the 1st, whatever. So if the part of that is included is if it's too far out, we're not even going to consider it. We'll tell you that. And that as we get closer, if it's still open, we can consider that. So, especially in a rental market like this, you can't leave stuff open for 3 months when there's
crazy.
30 people that need a home for every one that's available.
Yep.
So,
it's bananas. I get all the time. I get people calling me that looking for a rental property, and they tell me that I don't know, let's say it's June, and they say, Mo, my lease is up at end of September. Well, you're looking for homes way too early, right? Everything that you find in September when you would put an application in is going to be long gone by then. So wait till September to look, wait till September to put in applications. I tell people when they call me, we're not going to accept anything we're not going to hold a property longer than 30 days. The reality of the current market that we're in is I'm not even going to take anybody even for anywhere near 30 days because I probably have 8 other really good applicants that are ready to move in a lot sooner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean that's our job. That's what we have to pick based on all qualified applicants. That's the last data point. So, and qualified and completed applications. So completed applications and move-in date are huge to getting it done.
And that's it. That's really the biggest piece of the puzzle. Sometimes is those applications, right? The just getting people to complete and follow the instructions and complete the application that's always for us kind of step one.
And it's honestly the number one question I get the most in the application part and tenant screening part is, how long will it take you to run my rental application? Well,
what's my
nobody ever
answer?
likes the answer. Well, as quickly as you can get us everything we need.
That's right.
So we try to make it less than 3 days, knowing that most people can't get us everything we need even in a 3-day period. But the timeline comes down far more than people realize to the applicant. If you take the time to we have taken the time to put very thorough instructions, extremely thorough instructions throughout from the beginning, what to expect at each point, what to submit, what we need, what will happen if we don't get it, that it won't be ran until we have a full or this much of the application. Those things have been intentionally explained by us. So if you intentionally or unintentionally can't take those explanations or neglect them or hope we don't consider something, that takes the process longer. And depending on your situation, even if you submit a completed application, say you're not a W-2, say you're self-employed and we need a little bit more things or we have questions, those things we're quick about asking them and submitting them to you. If it takes us a day and a half to get that answer, and then 30 minutes later you're asking me, well, is it done yet? No, it just sat there for a day and a half because
we were waiting for an answer.
That's what we needed. Yeah.
Yeah. To your point, I have literally come into the office, gotten an application that was completely 100% ready to be processed with everything that we needed, that was easy to verify, everything we needed, able to run and call that person maybe an hour later and say, your application's been approved. Thank you for submitting everything. I'm going to send you a lease. What's our move-in date going to be? Or confirm our move-in date and go from there. And we're signing a lease in an hour or two. It can be that easy. What I just described to you, Kyle, from your experience is extremely rare.
It is extremely rare. It does happen. And I will say every time it happens, it shows on the application that they intentionally read and followed everything we asked them to do. Every time, because there'll be comments of, hey, I'm emailing this to you after I don't want to wait, I want to submit, blah, blah, blah. But by the time, say it's at night, usually people do this at night. By the time we get there to run the application, it's in our email. We still have everything we need. and it shouldn't be as rare as it is, but it is. And it's part of like what you said earlier. It's intentionally neglecting pieces of it or hoping we don't catch. We always catch because we always follow the same process. We need all these points to approve an application. Without them, we can't approve it. Without them, it's not completed or being considered, and that timeline can extend however long you want it to. So, but by the time someone does approve it, that timeline's over, or a lease is signed, I should say.
So, Kyle, I want to talk about one more important thing, and we could wrap this up. I think we beat up tenant selection really good, didn't we? I think we've done a really good job of demonstrating all the little ways that you could make mistakes, make bad decisions, which all turn into how much money you make or don't make, right? In those three areas we talked about.
Yeah, and I think it's why we have the conversation. Is it's not just, I think it's important for not only landlords, property managers, but also tenants on both sides of the process to understand why things are being asked, why certain information is needed, and not only that, why things take longer. Why, the whys behind all of it do matter to both parties, and if they know them, if we tell them, they'll be more open to submitting it, right? It's just like why we won't run your credit report until we have the completed application. That's not because we're just waiting until it's easy for us. That's not it at all. It's because if you finally submit your income and you don't qualify, I'm not going to hit you with a soft inquiry and all that. I mean, it's in your favor for us to not do it until it's completed. So.
Right. And that kind of gets me to kind of my final point. I mean, there's a lot of property managers and people out there that use this process, especially in a market like this, to nickel and dime people to death, right? Potential applicants with their application fees, with their processing fees. I've seen so many different fees from property managers in this stage of the process. It boggles me. It doesn't seem like the win-win situation that you and I are trying to create for our clients. It seems like you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot with all the fees. And then on the flip side, the tenants get frustrated, and rightly so, that they're having to put in application fees and then wait to see if they get that property, and then they've got to do it again with another property manager. And it may be a similar situation to ours, or it may be a harder process, right? Mm-hmm. Every property manager has a different process.
And it can be frustrating.
It can be. I get it. There's maybe no way around it, but it still can be extremely frustrating to the applicants.
Well, and that's because, like you said, a lot of them are submitting multiple applications. Maybe they've been through this process 7 times before, and they've paid on top of an app fee, an admin fee of $100 7 times before, and that racks up pretty quick, especially if you're just being told no at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. I do think, and this kind of ties back to completed application or whatever, but those things tend to be non-refundable, and there's not a lot of exceptions in the property management and the tenant screening world. I mean, there's rules that there shouldn't be exceptions in a lot of pieces of it. But if your application was never ran and you paid an application fee, it makes sense to refund it. It's just one of those factors that can go a lot of different ways depending on where you're applying, how you're applying. And you could have good applicants that are just waiting to find out that they're the only applicant on this house and they're for sure going to get it if they apply and blah, blah, blah. And they could have been a great applicant. Well, if you're only charging them the cost to run their application on a, credit reports cost money, those kind of things. But the cost, not the cost to pay your employee, but the cost it takes for the docs to run that application, or you come close to it, or
that's pretty much what we do with our app fee. Pretty much just covers our cost, right? For all those screenings that you and I talked about.
Yeah, because they're paying because they want to be considered.
Right.
Not I want to be considered and consider if I want to pay you to consider me. I just want our tenants to submit an application to be considered on the property. So, and that's how we structure that, to try to not incentivize against submitting an application with us for a property that you want.
Good stuff, Kyle. I guess we could wrap all this up and kind of tie it in a bow with tenant selection. There's probably hardly anything that's more important than getting off to a good start by getting the right person in your property so you can capitalize on that investment the way you intended to.
Correct. And it's not, I say this all the time, it's not picking the right person like you have a person in mind. It's picking somebody who will do what is best for your investment, which is pay their rent on time and take care of the property. And if you can verify to the best of your ability that they can do those two things and they intend to do those two things, then you have a great potential tenant on your hands. And that's what you're looking for, is a great potential tenant. Nothing's for sure ever, but...
So yeah, when you have close to a couple hundred properties that you're managing like we do some of those tenants that you maybe wouldn't put in slip through the cracks every once in a while? I mean, they do, but our process that we described just now, that we just spent the last 30 minutes or so describing, it goes a long way to protecting ourselves to make sure that we don't, have that mistake or that person in there that we don't want in there.
It's a mitigation effort. It's at least our process doesn't make us the target of the easy landlord to take advantage of. You never want to be that person, because you're going to be the landlord that gets taken advantage of the most amount of times. So that adds up, but there's no guarantees in this business. It's not always that people slip through the cracks. People's lives change, situations change. Doesn't mean you placed a bad tenant. Doesn't mean you made a bad decision in the screening process. Those are realities of life. When you made a bad decision or you didn't check hard enough, those things usually slap you in the face at the wrong time, and it's not really a question. So, and if it's happened to you, you probably know what I'm talking about. But if you're a landlord, especially had been for a long time, you also probably know that people's situations do change. So there's more than one factor in all of it.
What do you got for us, Kyle?
Well, it was a great discussion. So if you would like us to send you a rental estimate, or just, you want to be considered of what rents we can get you or just looked at or any of that, send us an email at showmethemoney@wearetpm.com. Send us as little as your property list, your name, and we'll go look for it if you want us to. But we'll send you back a rental estimate, free of commitment, free of charge, just to let you know what a great property manager could be doing for you.
Yeah, we've been doing that for people, haven't we? Show me the money. So yeah, reiterate what Kyle just said. Address, really, and what your current rents are. Really is the more information we have, the better. But if all we have is that, we can get back to you and let you know how much money we can make you by doing the things we talked about today and the things we've talked about in our past podcasts.
Yeah, and it's a potential estimate too, because it's about market rates. It's about what we can get you. It doesn't mean we're going to neglect completely your concerns of, hey, I have this tenant that's been here for 10 years. I don't want you to get him kicked out. Those are all case-by-case discussions. This is just, hey, if you're curious, you can have something show up in your email about what a great property manager can do for you.
Yep. Treat it like a business. Plant your tree and then treat it like a business, right?
And then watch it grow.
There you go. I love it. Good discussion, Kyle. Thank you very much. What are we gonna talk about next week? What's part 4 gonna be about?
I want to keep that a mystery for everybody here. No, I'm just kidding.
Tenant turnover.
Tenant turnover. Yep. The process in between. So
there's a whole bunch we're gonna get into there about why tenants leave, and we've got a whole list of things that you can do to make sure you keep tenants long term.
Yep. And if we aren't here for you guys next week, another thing a great property manager does for you is educate themselves and network and find out what's the best things to do in the industry. And by doing that, sometimes it's going to a conference. So
that's what we're going to be doing next week.
Yeah, we're going to be doing that next week. So we'll try to tune in, but if not, that's what we'll be.
Right on. All right. Good job, Kyle. And close us out.
Thank you guys for joining us. And don't remember or do. We are TPM.
We are TPM.